16 warships against a single mining barge. Commander Vexlor expected surrender. What he got was Captain Amara Jackson's defiant refusal, and a ship that absorbed energy instead of breaking. This isn't a story about firepower. It's about how human audacity turned a blockade into the first step toward saving the galaxy. Commander Vexlor's career hinged on 3 certainties every Galactic Confederation officer memorized. Space was vast and mostly empty, making travel both tedious and dangerous. Control of jump points meant control of trade, movement, and ultimately power. And humans? They were, by universal agreement, insane. Not dangerous in the conventional sense, not powerful in the structured way of the elder species, but insane. Unpredictable, unreliable. These weren't suggestions. They were bedrock principles, woven into every tactical simulation, every command decision tree, every academy exam for 300 standard cycles. Vexlor had built his command style on them. His precision, his adherence to the elegant dance of fleet maneuvering, his quiet pride in a perfectly executed blockade, all of it rested on the assumption that the universe operated on a set of predictable, if sometimes harsh, rules. The Confederation's entire military structure prized compliance. Initiative was a variable to be minimized, a potential flaw in an otherwise flawless machine. Creativity on the battlefield was a synonym for chaos, something to be disciplined out of junior officers. Why innovate when the established doctrines had never failed? They had pacified rebellious systems, contained dimensional incursions, and maintained order across 1,000 stars. The system worked because everyone eventually followed the rules. Then the sensors picked up the barge. It drifted toward the blockaded jump point, a mess of mismatched hull plates and protruding sensor arrays. Its design language was a jarring clash of function over form pragmatism and what looked like sheer desperation. The classification software struggled, finally labeling it a Class G mining and transport vessel with minimal defensive ratings. But its energy signatures didn't match any known mining vessel in the database. They flickered and pulsed in irregular rhythms, a chaotic heartbeat. Vexlor ordered the standard first contact and interdiction protocol. A crisp textbook warning transmission was sent on all frequencies, listing the Confederation regulations being violated and the required surrender procedure. The view screen showed the vessel continuing its approach, its trajectory unwavering. No change in engine output, no activation of standard shielding, no panicked communication. Nothing. This was the first moment the universe didn't behave. The protocol was clear. The threat was obvious. 16 warships against 1 civilian craft. The expected response was immediate compliance or immediate annihilation. The mining barge offered neither. It just kept coming, a silent, ugly question mark moving through the void. On the bridge, the quiet hum of systems and the soft chirp of consoles seemed to grow louder in the absence of the expected reaction. Vexlor watched the screen, his mind running through the contingency protocols for non-response. But those protocols were for damaged ships or crippled AI, not for a vessel that was clearly operational and choosing to ignore them. He felt the first, almost imperceptible crack in his understanding. The view screen showed a fact that doctrine said should not exist. Vexlor gave the order for a warning volley. Standard doctrine. A precise, coordinated burst from 4 destroyers, aimed well clear of the mining barge's hull but close enough to shake its sensors and rattle its crew. A show of overwhelming force meant to illustrate the futility of resistance. The energy lances cut through the void, a brilliant display of disciplined power. The human ship did not alter course. It did not activate any recognizable shielding. It did not return fire. Instead, its patchwork hull began to glow with a soft internal light where the energy passed nearest. The sensors reported something unprecedented. The vessel was not deflecting the energy. It was absorbing it. The readings spiked, then normalized, showing a net gain in the barge's power reserves. Vexlor's tactical officer confirmed it with a flat, confused tone. "Commander, our weapons fire appears to have charged their systems." This defied physics. It defied logic. It defied 3 centuries of established military science. Vexlor's training offered no counter for an enemy that ate your attacks for breakfast. He shifted tactics, moving from warning to disable. Target their primary engine nacelles. A pinpoint strike. I want them dead in the water. The beam was a surgical instrument designed to sever power conduits and leave a vessel helpless. It struck the designated spot on the barge's engine housing. For a second, nothing happened. Then the entire section of hull where the beam made contact flared a bright, almost white-hot blue. The energy wasn't dispersing or causing damage. It was being drawn into the metal itself, like water into a sponge. The view screen showed the human vessel continuing its steady advance, its engine output now reading slightly higher than before the attack. It had used their precise, powerful strike to top up its batteries. The sheer brazen efficiency of it was an insult to every principle of warfare Vexlor held dear. He ran through the options. Boarding was too risky against an unknown that consumed energy. A full barrage might just make it stronger. Containment fields might be absorbed just as easily. Every tool in his arsenal, every protocol in the fleet manual, was designed for an enemy that reacted predictably to force. This thing did not react. It consumed. The bridge fell into a deep, uncomfortable silence. The only sounds were the hum of life support and the soft clicks of consoles as officers ran and re-ran simulations, each one returning the same result: tactical failure. There was no precedent for this. No chapter in any academy textbook covered how to fight a ship held together by what looked like spare parts and sheer stubbornness. A vessel that treated a warship's main battery as a convenient power source. Vexlor stared at the view screen, at the ugly, practical, impossible ship drifting closer to his formation. He was a fleet commander of the Galactic Confederation, holder of the Star of Valor, master of 16 warships, and he had absolutely no idea what to do next. Doctrine had nothing for him. For the first time in his career, he faced a problem that could not be solved by applying more disciplined force. The answers simply were not there. A new transmission window popped open on the main view screen. Vexlor expected panic. He expected formal surrender requests. He expected someone begging for their life according to the standard diplomatic templates. Instead, he got a human woman with a faded sweatshirt and a distracted expression. Her hair was pulled back, a data slate tucked under her arm. She looked like she'd just been interrupted mid-task. "All right, listen," she began. No title, no formal greeting, her voice carrying the flat efficiency of someone discussing a shipping delay. "We've got a bit of a timing problem here. I'm on a schedule." She tapped the data slate. "This run is for premium single-origin Earth coffee beans. They're not getting any fresher sitting out here while we play military standoff. You understand the problem. Stale coffee is a galactic crime." Vexlor could only stare. His communications officer looked back at him, equally lost. There was no protocol for this. The woman on the screen, identified by her ship's transponder as Captain Amara Jackson, was not negotiating a surrender. She was negotiating a delivery route. She had reframed his entire fleet blockade as a minor logistical hiccup, a traffic jam inconveniencing her cargo. Her tone was not defiant. It was impatient, as if he were a stubborn bureaucrat refusing to stamp a form. In the background of the transmission, 2 other crew members were visible. One was welding a conduit that sparked mildly. The other was sipping from a mug watching sensor readouts. They projected a sense of absolute, unshakable competence that was completely at odds with their ship's ramshackle appearance. They weren't soldiers facing annihilation. They were specialists on a tight deadline, annoyed by the interruption. "Look," Jackson continued, her tone shifting to something almost conciliatory, but on her own terms. "I get it. You've got your rules, jump point control, restricted space, all that, fine. But my cargo has a shelf life, so here's my counteroffer. You let us through. We deliver. On our return trip, we'll submit to a full customs inspection. You can send over a liaison officer right now if you want. Verify we're not smuggling contraband. We'll even give them a tour. We've got nothing to hide." The audacity was breathtaking. She was offering him a diplomatic solution, extending guest rights and transparency, all while completely ignoring the fact that he had just tried to blast her engines out from under her. She was treating this like a minor trade dispute, and in doing so, she seized the moral high ground without even seeming to try. Her casual offer of a liaison felt less like a concession and more like a teacher indulging a curious child. Vexlor realized, with a cold clarity that cut through his training, that he was not dealing with a military commander. This was not an enemy to be outmaneuvered or outfought in any sense he understood. Captain Jackson operated on a completely different set of priorities, a different logic. Her battlefield was supply chains and pragmatic solutions, not honor and disciplined formations. The threat of force was not a language she seemed to speak. She was something entirely new, and his carefully constructed rulebook had just become a stack of worthless paper. The transmission ended, leaving him with the bizarre, lingering image of a woman more concerned about coffee beans than his 16 warships. Science Officer Plick broke the silence on the bridge. His voice was calm, a stark contrast to the tactical officer's rising confusion. "Commander, permission to volunteer for a boarding and inspection mission." The request landed like an impact. Boarding a ship that absorbed energy was against every regulation, a clear breach of basic operational safety. It was a suicide mission by the book. Vexlor turned, studying his officer. Plick's large, dark eyes held no trace of panic. They held calculation. "Explain your reasoning, officer." "That vessel represents a complete data gap," Plick stated, his tone clinical. "Their technology does not conform to Confederation principles. Their social response defies all first contact models. We have an opportunity here, Commander. A controlled opportunity." Captain Jackson offered a liaison. Her assurance about not harming guests while unconventional carried a high degree of verifiable sincerity in her vocal stress indicators. She meant it. This was the first crack. Plick was not operating on fear or doctrine. He was operating on scientific curiosity, a drive the Confederation's rigid structure had systematically suppressed for generations. He saw a puzzle where his comrades saw a threat. Then he made a second, more significant confession. "I must also report, Commander, that I have conducted unofficial studies of human cultural transmissions, their historical records, their entertainment media. It is a violation of Directive 7 Alpha, but the data is illuminating. They are not insane. They are adaptive in ways our models cannot predict. This mission could provide a first-hand data set that would be invaluable." Vexlor felt the weight of the decision. He was being asked to authorize an action that broke multiple protocols based on an officer's unsanctioned research and a gut feeling about a human's tone of voice. It was everything his training told him to reject. Yet his training had also left him powerless against this strange ship. Doctrine offered no solutions. Perhaps Plick's unsanctioned curiosity did. The xenophobic caution that was standard Confederation policy warred with the desperate need for actionable intelligence. They were losing this engagement without a single shot being effectively returned. Curiosity, for the first time on Vexlor's bridge, overrode inherited fear. He was not just agreeing to a mission, he was endorsing a new way of thinking. "Make it happen, Plick. Full sensor sweep, record everything, and do not get yourself killed. That's an order." The words felt strange in his mouth, less a command and more a plea. Plick acknowledged with a short nod and left the bridge. The view screen shifted to an external feed, showing the small shuttle detach from the flagship and move toward the mining barge. It looked like a refined, polished pearl approaching a heap of scrap metal. The distance closed. An irregular bay. Door on the human ship irised open, revealing a dimly lit interior that seemed to be part cargo hold, part machine shop. There were no welcoming parties, no honor guard, just an open door. The shuttle crossed the threshold and disappeared inside. The bay door closed. The feed from the shuttle's external cameras cut out. Vexlor was left staring at the silent, blockaded ship, his best science officer now inside. The mission was no longer a military operation. It had become a cultural exchange, and the fate of his command now rested on the word of a human captain and the curiosity of one officer who had dared to look beyond the rules. Plick's shuttle returned. It moved slower, heavier, as if weighted down by what it carried. He stepped back onto the bridge, his usual composure replaced by a sharp, focused urgency. He held a small case of data crystals, their surfaces etched with human markings. He didn't bother with a formal report. He walked directly to the main console and slotted one in. "Commander, the situation has fundamentally changed." The view screen lit up not with topographical maps or fleet positions, but with sensor data from the human ship. It was raw, unfiltered, a chaotic stream of readings the Confederation's own systems had dismissed as background noise. Plick's analysis overlaid the data, drawing connections, revealing patterns. A shape emerged from the void. a vast clustering signal moving through a neighboring star system. It was not a fleet. It was a swarm, the Void Harvesters. Plick confirmed the name, his voice flat. A previously undocumented species, a biosynthetic hive intelligence. Their ships were not built. They were grown, living ecosystems that consumed organic matter to fuel their expansion. They stripped planets, moons, asteroids, processing everything into biomass and energy. Their method of travel was the most alarming part. They didn't use jump points. They bent local space-time, creating their own temporary corridors. It was inefficient on a small scale, but for a swarm of that size, it was unstoppable. They moved as a single entity, a unified consciousness spread across hundreds of vessels. Plick's readings were horrifyingly precise. The swarm's trajectory was a straight line through inhabited systems. Their projected arrival at this very jump point was in 36 hours. The scale was incomprehensible. A single harvester vessel was the size of a small moon. The swarm contained dozens. This was not an invasion. It was a consumption event, a galactic-scale clearing of the board. The Confederation fleet, the pride of the Tonian military, was a speed bump in their path. A new transmission window snapped open. Captain Jackson's face filled half the view screen, the harvester data on the other. Her casual demeanor was gone, replaced by a grim, operational clarity. All right, you've seen it. The neighborhood's about to get a lot less friendly. Your pretty formation isn't going to cut it. They'll read it, predict it, and swarm right over you. You need a new plan. She didn't ask for help. She stated a fact. Her tone implied the solution was obvious, a simple matter of applying the right kind of pressure to the problem. She was already pivoting, her mind moving past the revelation and directly into the response. We've been tracking their approach for weeks. Our sensors are different. We see things yours miss. That's how we knew to be here. This isn't a blockade anymore, Commander. It's a choke point, and we need to hold it. The proof was on the screen. A real-time feed of the harvester swarm's advance, a tide of biosynthetic horror moving through the void. The data was undeniable. The math was absolute. The narrative wasn't about surrender or protocol anymore. The standoff was over. An existential crisis had just walked through the door. The transmission ended, leaving the cold, hard truth of the numbers glowing on the view screen, counting down to an extinction-level event. Jackson's next transmission arrived not with a plea but with a blueprint. A crudely rendered schematic of a device built from modified mining drill cores, power converters, and what looked like spare comms array parts. She called it a quantum resonance destabilizer, a scrambler. Their cohesion is the problem, she explained, her voice cutting through the low murmur of the bridge. They don't talk to each other. They are each other. A single mind spread across all those ships. Quantum entanglement on a scale our science says is impossible. Her theory was stark. The harvester swarm didn't coordinate. It acted a perfect instantaneous unit. Their tactical brilliance wasn't a product of strategy. It was the product of a single shared consciousness. Attacking them as individual ships was pointless. You had to attack the link itself. Cut the invisible thread that bound them into one, terrifyingly efficient organism. If we hit them with a broad spectrum, quantum disruption pulse at the exact moment they emerge from their travel corridor, she continued, pointing to a specific energy frequency on the schematic. We scramble their entangled states. For a short window, maybe minutes, they won't be a swarm. They'll be a bunch of confused, isolated animals. Your fleet can handle that. Your disciplined volleys are perfect for picking off disconnected targets. The plan was audacious, insane. It hinged on a piece of technology that, according to Confederation science, shouldn't function. It was built from scavenged parts, held together by human ingenuity and a desperate need to solve an immediate problem. It was the antithesis of everything Vexlor's academy training valued: refined, tested, reliable systems. This thing was a tinkerer's nightmare. His tactical officers immediately objected. The objections were crisp, professional, and rooted in centuries of military doctrine. The energy requirements are ludicrous, Commander. That device would require a power source the size of a cruiser's reactor to even attempt a pulse of that magnitude. Another added, the targeting variables are incalculable. A miss by a fraction of a degree renders the entire effort useless. It's a gamble with no statistical probability of success. A third simply stated the core belief. This is not warfare. This is recklessness. It confirms every assessment of human instability. Vexlor listened to his officers, to their clean, logical, and utterly useless arguments. They were right. By the book, they were completely right. Then Jackson's voice came back over the comm, calm and cutting. Your formations are beautiful, Commander. A real work of art, perfect symmetry, perfect discipline, and completely predictable. That swarm will read your beautiful dance before you finish the first step. They'll know exactly where you'll be and what you'll do. They don't think. They just know. You're not fighting a fleet. You're fighting a single brain, and it's a brain that's seen your playbook. Her words landed with the force of a physical blow. She wasn't criticizing his skill. She was diagnosing a fatal flaw in his entire philosophy. His beautiful, predictable formations were a liability. His disciplined adherence to doctrine was a weakness to be exploited. The choice was no longer between a good plan and a bad plan. It was between a certain elegant defeat and a desperate, ugly chance at survival. He looked from the skeptical faces of his officers to the chaotic schematic on the view screen. He looked at the countdown to the harvester's arrival. The numbers kept ticking down. Doctrine offered a graceful loss. The human offered a messy, improbable, and potentially war-winning insanity. The commander stood at the precipice, his career, his fleet, and billions of lives hinging on a single decision. Trust the system that had always defined him, or trust the chaotic pragmatism of a mining captain and her cobbled-together machine. The silence on the bridge was absolute, waiting for his order. Jackson transmitted a new tactical overlay, a stark contrast to the geometric precision of Vexlor's own battle plans. You need to unlearn everything, her voice stated, flat and instructional. Your formations are clean. They're also a roadmap. That swarm doesn't see 16 individual ships. It sees a single pattern. It calculates the pattern's next move before your nav computer does. You're not fighting a fleet. You're fighting a single mind that's infinitely faster than yours. Her proposed formation looked like a malfunction on the view screen. Ships were scattered in seemingly random clusters, distances uneven, vectors intersecting at odd angles. It was visual chaos. Irregularity is the point, she explained. You mask your true numbers. You hide your firing arcs. You make distance a variable they can't reliably calculate. They expect a phalanx. Give them a debris field. They'll waste precious seconds trying to find the pattern. That's the window. The human ship's role in this mess became clear. Its camouflage wasn't for stealth. It was for near-total sensor invisibility. The patchwork hull didn't just absorb energy. It mimicked the background radiation of the void, its signature bleeding into the cosmic noise. More critically, its engine didn't produce a standard propulsion signature. It used localized gravitational eddies, tiny, controlled distortions in spacetime that were practically invisible to conventional scanners. The last laugh could sit almost on top of a harvester vessel and not register as a threat. It was a ghost. This was the linchpin of the entire desperate plan. While the Confederation fleet engaged the disoriented swarm in its chaotic new formation, drawing their fractured attention, the last laugh would move. It would use its unique signature masking to get dangerously close to the heart of the emerging swarm, the point of highest entangled activity. The human vessel, this ugly collection of spare parts, had to place itself at ground zero. The few milliseconds of confusion bought by the irregular fleet movements were all the time Jackson's crew would have to fire the scrambler. It was a plan built on a cascade of tiny, improbable advantages, each one vulnerable to 1,000 variables. Vexlor looked from the chaotic overlay on his screen to the faces of his bridge officers. Their expressions ranged from deep skepticism to outright alarm. This went against every tactical principle ever drilled into them. Discipline was safety. Order was strength. Predictability was the mark of a professional force. What Jackson proposed was the opposite. It was organized anarchy. It required each ship captain to act with near-total independence, reacting to a fluid, chaotic battlefield with no central guidance. It trusted instinct over calculation. He thought of his academy instructors, their rigid lessons on formation integrity and synchronized volleys. He thought of the countless simulations where deviation meant failure. Then he looked at the sensor readout of the approaching harvester swarm, a perfect, unstoppable wave of coordinated destruction. Their perfection was their weakness. They could not handle chaos because they had never encountered it. The flawless machine breaks when you throw a handful of grit into its gears. The order felt alien in his mouth, a betrayal of his own training. All ships acknowledge new formation coordinates. Battle stations, prepare for unsynchronized independent engagement protocols. He heard the sharp intake of breath from his tactical officer. The bridge fell silent, the weight of the command settling over them. They were not just preparing for a battle. They were preparing to become something else entirely. A fleet that fought like humans. A force that embraced chaos as a weapon. The view screen showed the new formation. A scattered, illogical mess. It was the most beautiful thing Vexlor had ever seen. It was their only chance. The jump point flared. Space itself tore open, a silent, violent rip in reality. The Harvester swarm emerged not as separate ships but as a single, cohesive organism. Their formation was a perfect, geometrically precise phalanx. Each biosynthetic vessel positioned for maximum overlapping fields of fire and mutual support. They moved with a synchronization that was almost beautiful, a terrifying ballet of perfect coordination. There was no hesitation, no scan cycle, no adjustment period. They simply arrived and their weapon systems activated in unison, targeting solutions already locked onto the scattered Confederation fleet. Their perfection was their weapon. It was also, Jackson had bet everything, their weakness. The view screen on the bridge showed the targeting solutions painting every ship in Vexlor's chaotic formation. The moment stretched, a breath held across 16 bridges. Then a strange, distorted pulse of energy radiated from a point of empty space near the heart of the swarm. It wasn't a weapon blast. It had no destructive force. It was a wave of pure information chaos, a screeching dissonance across the quantum spectrum. The pulse washed over the lead Harvester vessels. The effect was immediate and catastrophic. To the Harvester swarm, the perfect formation shuddered. Ships that had been moving as one suddenly veered off course, their trajectories becoming erratic, uncoordinated. The unified assault pattern dissolved into a confused mess. A vessel on the left flank fired its main battery, not at a Tonian ship, but into the side of its nearest swarm mate, ripping through the organic hull. Another began spinning wildly, its navigation systems clearly fried. The single brilliant mind had been shattered into 1,000 panicked, isolated fragments. They were no longer a swarm. They were a collection of blind, disoriented animals. The Tonian fleet, operating on Jackson's chaotic battle plan, did not hesitate. They exploited the opening. Disciplined volleys of energy fire, the very thing that had been useless against the unified swarm, now found their mark. Isolated Harvester ships, unable to coordinate their defenses or support each other, were picked apart. They died not to a superior strategy, but to simple targeted violence against confused targets. The Confederation captains, freed from the rigid dance of formation fighting, engaged with a new fierce independence. They hunted. From the void, the last laugh became visible for a split second as it fired the scrambler, its camouflage flickering under the energy discharge. It was already moving, using the gravitational eddies to slip between the disoriented Harvester vessels. A predator moving through a stunned herd, it fired mining charges into exposed engine clusters, used its improvised cutting beams on weapon emplacements. The humans weren't just fighting. They were surgically dismantling the broken swarm, creating more chaos, widening the fissures in the enemy's ranks. For 3 minutes, the plan worked perfectly. The Harvesters were on the defensive, unable to mount a coherent counterattack. The tide of the battle had turned on a single, impossible pulse of energy. But then the sensors on the bridge began to pick up a change. The chaotic energy signatures from the Harvester fleet started to stabilize. Individual ships began to slow their erratic movements. They weren't reconnecting into a single mind, not yet, but they were beginning to recalibrate, to find a new, crude form of local coordination. The scrambler's effect was a temporary disruption, not a permanent disablement. The window was closing. The view screen showed the countdown Jackson had provided for the pulse's effective duration. The numbers were dropping fast, much faster than our optimistic projections. The unified organism was fractured, but it was learning to function without its brain. The broken pieces were starting to move again. The alert chimed on Vexlor's console, a priority signal from the last laugh, marked with a human coding prefix he'd never seen before. Jackson's face appeared, Smudged with grime, her expression grimly focused. Behind her, the human ship's bridge was a storm of activity. Consoles sparking, emergency lights flashing red. "Change of plans, Commander." "The scrambler's fading faster than we thought." "Their network is adapting, reorganizing. We've got minutes, not hours, before they stitch themselves back together." The view screen split, showing the real-time sensor feed. She was right. The chaotic dance of the harvester ships was beginning to slow. Erratic movements were smoothing into purposeful, if crude, local coordination. Isolated ships were turning back toward the Confederation fleet, their weapons powering up. The temporary advantage was evaporating. The math was shifting back in the swarm's favor. "The jump point is the problem," Jackson stated, her voice cutting through the static of the transmission. "It's their door. We need to slam it shut permanently." Her solution was stark. Overload the jump point's energy nexus from the inside. Use the raw, unstable power the last laugh had been absorbing from their attacks and funnel it directly into the point's core. The resulting feedback loop would cause a catastrophic collapse, sealing the route for at least a standard year. It would trap any harvesters on this side, but more importantly, it would cut off the main body of the swarm still in transit. The tactical implications were immediate and brutal. It required flying directly into the jump point's energy field, a maelstrom of forces that ripped conventional ships apart. It was a suicide mission. There would be no return. The energy discharge would be absolute. The conduit itself would likely be obliterated in the process, along with anything inside it. Vexlor looked from her determined face to the tactical display. His fleet was still engaged, buying time against a recovering enemy. The jump point glowed ominously in the center of the battle. This was not a tactical withdrawal. This was a sacrifice. It was the complete and total erasure of their only escape route and the crew that flew the mission. He had to trust that this desperate final act would work, that their deaths would mean something. He gave a single, slow nod. "The fleet will provide covering fire. We will clear a path." There was nothing else to say. No honorifics, no ceremony, just the stark acceptance of a necessary end. Jackson's mouth tightened into a thin line. Not a smile. An acknowledgement. "Figured you'd see it that way. Don't worry about our ride home. This old girl doesn't just absorb weapons fire." She tapped a console behind her. "She drinks up jump point energy too. It's how we navigate the messy routes the big guys avoid. We're the only ship that can get deep enough into that storm to trigger the overload. It's not a suicide run. It's a calculated risk with a very low survival probability. But it's the only play we have." The distinction was purely academic. The odds were still astronomically against them. But in that moment, her blunt pragmatism reframed the entire desperate act. It wasn't a grand, tragic sacrifice. It was a tactical solution, ugly and effective, born from a partnership of complete and utter desperation. The human ship, built for survival in the forgotten corners of space, was now the only key to saving the civilized galaxy. The transmission cut out, leaving Vexlor with the image of the battered mining vessel turning its nose toward the raging energy storm of the jump point. Vexlor ordered the fleet to clear a path. Every remaining warship in his command shifted fire, pouring concentrated energy into the harvester vessels between the last laugh and the jump point. It was a brutal, focused effort. Ships that had been fighting for survival minutes before now fought to create a single, narrow corridor. The risk was extreme. They exposed their flanks, drawing fire to themselves to keep that lane open. The human ship was their only weapon left. They had to get it through. The last laugh accelerated. Its patchwork hull glowed not from absorbed weapons fire this time, but from the raw energy of the jump point itself. The space around the conduit was a storm of distorted physics, a visible ripple in reality that tore at anything that came near. Standard vessels would have been shredded by the gravitational shear. The human ship pushed into it, its unique design allowing it to navigate the chaos where others would disintegrate. It was a precise, calculated dive into a star's heart. On the bridge, the sensors tracked its descent. The ship's energy signature spiked, climbing far beyond any safe operating parameter. It was doing exactly what Jackson said it would. It was drinking the jump point's power, absorbing the violent forces of the conduit into its own systems. The readouts blinked with frantic warnings. The ship was reaching critical mass, its structures stressed to the absolute limit. It was a bottle filling with lightning, moments from shattering. The jump point reacted. The stable, controlled aperture of the conduit began to waver. Its edges flickered and distorted, the carefully maintained balance of energy collapsing under the massive, unnatural drain. The fabric of the localized space-time node started to unravel. The view screen showed the phenomenon spreading outward from the last laugh's position, a wave of instability racing through the conduit. 3 harvester vessels were caught mid-transition, their biosynthetic hulls half emerged from the jump point. As the energy field destabilized, the forces involved became uncontrolled. The ships were not simply destroyed. They were unmade, ripped apart by conflicting gravitational tides and dimensional shear, their structures vaporized in flashes of light and dissipating organic matter. The main body of the swarm, still waiting in the transit corridor on the other side, was cut off. The door slammed shut. The collapse was total. The jump point flared once, a final blinding pulse of white light that consumed the last laugh's signature completely. Then it winked out. The space where a stable gateway had existed for centuries was now just empty void. A few faint energy echoes crackled and faded. Nothing else remained. The remaining harvester ships on this side of the sealed conduit, already disorganized and leaderless, were now completely isolated. Their numbers had been cut by more than half in the initial scrambler attack and the jump point collapse. They fought on, but their coordination was gone. The instinct to consume remained, but without the guiding hive mind, it was a blind, feral urge. The Confederation fleet, bloodied but intact, finished the task. They moved through the scattered remnants with a grim, methodical efficiency. There was no elegance to it now, no beautiful formations. It was cleanup. A brutal, necessary mopping-up operation against a broken enemy. The victory was decisive. The immediate threat was neutralized. No further transmission came from the last laugh. No distress beacon. No final heroic message. The sensors showed no debris field, no escape pod signatures. The energy discharge had been absolute. The ship and its crew were simply gone, consumed by the storm they had unleashed to save everyone else. The bridge was silent. The only sound the steady reports of enemy ships eliminated. The battle was won. The cost was on the view screen for everyone to see. An empty patch of space where a jump point used to be. The battle ended not with a final explosion, but with a slow, grim fade to quiet. The last harvester ship, cut off and disoriented, was reduced to drifting wreckage by a concentrated volley from a damaged cruiser. The immediate aftermath was not celebration. It was the stark processing of a brutal equation. The fleet's losses appeared on Vexlor's screen. Ships damaged, lives lost, resources expended. And the final line item, stark and uncompromising, the last laugh in all hands. No survivors. No recovery possible. The cost was exact and absolute. The alternative, however, was not on any screen. It existed only in tactical projections and the raw data Plick had brought back. A complete and utter devastation of every system along the Harvester's projected path. Hundreds of billions of lives, entire civilizations simply consumed. The math was cold and left no room for argument. The sacrifice of 3 humans and their ramshackle ship had bought the survival of a significant portion of the known galaxy. It was the worst kind of victory, the kind that leaves a permanent mark on everyone who survives it. That mark began to change things, immediately. Standing orders from high command, based on centuries of unchallenged doctrine, were quietly suspended. New emergency protocols were drafted, distributed to every fleet commander within hours. The documents were thick with new contingency plans for unknown threats, unexpected technological asymmetries, and first contact scenarios that did not assume immediate superiority. The rigid, predictable formations that had been the pride of the Tonian military were officially designated conditional tactical, to be used only against known conventional foes. The Confederation had just received a masterclass in the price of predictability. Human-inspired tactics, once dismissed as insanity, were now formalized. The concepts of quantum scrambling, energy absorption, and gravitational camouflage were no longer theoretical curiosities. They were urgent research and development priorities. Fleet training simulations were rewritten to include scenarios where the enemy did not follow the rules, where discipline was a weakness and chaos was a tool. The very language of military strategy began to shift, incorporating terms like adaptive engagement and asymmetric response. A formal memorial was commissioned for Captain Amara Jackson and her crew. It was not placed in a hall of heroes surrounded by flags and polished metal. It was a simple, durable plaque affixed to the command console of every capital ship in the Confederation fleet. The inscription was direct, a quote pulled from her final transmission: "Stale coffee is a galactic crime." It served as a permanent, jarring reminder. A reminder that the people you dismiss as outsiders might be the only ones who can save you. A reminder that courage often looks like stubborn pragmatism in the face of certain doom. This was the true tipping point. The sacrifice did not just win a battle, it broke a 300-year-old mindset. It forced a galactic power to look in the mirror and see its own fragility, its own arrogance. The view screen on Vexlor's bridge no longer showed a tactical readout. At his order, it displayed a slow rotation of star charts. Peaceful, thriving systems, their lights undimmed, their populations going about their lives completely unaware of the horror that had been moments from their doorstep. These were not abstract points of light. They were the answer to the question of cost. They were the reason the math, however brutal, had been acceptable. The silence on the bridge was no longer the silence of shock. It was the silence of a debt acknowledged, a lesson learned the hardest way possible. The galaxy had been saved, and it would never be the same. The formal commendation for Captain Jackson and her crew took 3 months to process. 3 months of committee reviews, evidentiary hearings, and interdepartmental memos. The bureaucracy of the Confederation moved with a glacial certainty, even when acknowledging that its own survival was due to an act that broke every rule. The award for extraordinary galactic service was eventually ratified. It was the highest honor the Confederation could bestow. The citation was read on every fleet channel. The ceremony was brief and somber. There were no living recipients to accept it. The real fight, however, happened in the strategy rooms and tactical academies. The resistance was quiet, ingrained, and formidable. Senior tacticians, veterans of 100 successful campaigns fought by the book, argued against the new doctrines. They called the human strategies undisciplined, reckless, and a dangerous deviation from proven methods. They pointed to the losses sustained at the jump point, the damaged ships, the chaos of the battle. They clung to the clean, predictable geometry of power that had served them for centuries. They saw adaptability as a synonym for anarchy, but evidence as a powerful tool. The battle recordings were uncompromising. The sensor logs, the weapon efficiency reports, the tactical overlay of the harvester swarm's collapse. The data was all there. It formed an argument that no traditionalist could rationally refute. The disciplined volleys had been useless against the unified swarm. The chaotic human-inspired tactics had broken it. The ugly, cobbled-together scrambler had worked where pristine energy lances had failed. The math of survival favored the new way. It was not a matter of opinion. It was a matter of physics. This evidence forced a structural shift. Emergency response protocols for unknown threats were rewritten from the ground up. They were no longer appendixes in the fleet manual. They became Volume 1. Standard operating procedure now demanded an asymmetric threat assessment for any first contact scenario. The assumption of technological or tactical superiority was officially removed from all standing orders. Fleet commanders were now encouraged, and in some cases ordered, to consider non-standard solutions. The very definition of a weapon was expanded to include things like energy absorption, signal scrambling, and gravitational camouflage. The official stance on humanity shifted in lockstep. They were no longer classified as unpredictable containment. Recommended. The designation was changed to Adaptive Strategic Partner Potential. They were no longer seen as reckless. Outsiders to be managed and kept at a distance. They were recognized as catalysts. Their presence in the galaxy was now understood as a source of strategic evolution, a forced injection of new ideas into a system that had become dangerously rigid. Their value was not in their firepower, but in their perspective. This change was not just military. It began to seep into the broader Confederation culture. A societal reevaluation of adaptability over compliance started in the officer corps and spread outward. The academies began accepting a small percentage of cadets based on lateral problem-solving aptitude, rather than pure doctrinal examination scores. The idea that there might be more than one right way to solve a problem began to take root in a civilization built on finding the single correct answer. The resolution was a quiet revolution. The culture of the Confederation did not become human. It became more respectful of approaches that were not its own. It learned to incorporate difference rather than suppress it. On the bridge of Vexlor's flagship, this change was tangible. Tactical discussions now included phrases that would have been grounds for disciplinary action months before. Officers suggested unorthodox maneuvers. They debated the merits of appearing weak to lure an opponent. They considered the tactical value of a ship that looked like junk. The unthinkable had become part of the daily briefing. The bridge, once a temple to perfect order, now hummed with the quiet energy of new possibilities. The galaxy learned a sharp lesson that day. Humans make for terrible enemies but formidable allies. What the Confederation High Command had once officially labeled as insanity was quietly reclassified as high-order adaptive capability. The term itself was scrubbed from tactical databases. The very traits the military academies had drilled out of officers for generations were now being drilled back in. Recklessness became strategic risk-taking. Disrespect for protocol became creative problem-solving. Stubbornness became unwavering resilience. The words changed, and with them the entire approach to power. Human audacity, once a point of concern in diplomatic briefings, was now a recognized strategic asset. Their willingness to bend or outright break rules that were considered immutable had saved more lives than 1,000 perfect fleet maneuvers. Their ingenuity, born from necessity and limited resources, was now a central pillar of the Confederation's revised defense strategy. Military engineers who had once designed elegant, flawless systems were now tasked with building robust, repairable, and adaptable technology. The concept of good enough to work gained respect alongside perfectly engineered. The victory narrative that spread through the fleet wasn't about firepower or discipline. It was about that last transmission. The mention of coffee beans going stale. That small, mundane, stubbornly human detail gave the entire event a relatable weight. It wasn't a story about gods and monsters. It was a story about people with a job to do, who refused to let an apocalypse get in the way of a deadline. That memory stuck. It was warm. It was real. It made the sacrifice concrete in a way grand speeches never could. The true legacy of the last laugh wasn't a new weapon or a tactical doctrine. It was a reoriented approach to power itself. The Confederation had learned that control was not always about imposing order. Sometimes it was about managing chaos. Diplomacy shifted from a process of enforcing compliance to one of finding mutual incentive, much like Jackson's offer of a customs inspection. The goal was no longer to make others follow your rules, but to find a set of rules that worked for everyone involved. Courage was redefined. It was no longer the courage to stand fast in a perfect formation. It was the courage to abandon that formation when it became a liability. It was the courage to trust a plan built on duct tape and hope. It was the courage to fly into a jump point with no expectation of return. Compliance kept you safe. Courage rewrote the rules of the game. For Commander Vexlor, the transformation was complete. He looked at the revised fleet manuals on his screen, the new protocols that encouraged independent action and tactical flexibility. He remembered his initial contempt for the ugly mining barge, his frustration at its defiance. That feeling was gone. In its place was a hard-won respect, forged in the heat of an impossible battle. He understood the value now. It wasn't in their technology, impressive as it was. It was in their perspective, their stubborn, pragmatic, and utterly fearless way of looking at a problem and seeing not barriers, but possibilities. The official after-action transmission from High Command ended with a new addendum to the Confederation's core principles. A single line added to the ancient texts. It stated that while space is vast and jump points are power, humanity represents the critical variable of ingenuity. Their value to the galactic community was no longer measured in ships or territory, but in their unique and irreplaceable ability to challenge assumptions and find solutions where none were thought to exist. The transmission closed, leaving Vexlor with a quiet certainty. The galaxy had been saved not by its strongest navy, but by its most adaptable mind. Commander Vexlor's transformation began with contempt. The initial sensor reading of the mining barge confirmed every negative briefing he'd ever received on humanity. It was an ugly, asymmetrical mess. Its defiance of his blockade wasn't just a tactical problem. It was a personal insult to the ordered universe he had sworn to uphold. His suspicion was a reflex, honed by decades of training that valued predictability above all else. Humans were the outlier, the variable that threatened to corrupt a perfect system. Each encounter with the last laugh chipped away at that foundation. The barge's refusal to surrender wasn't just stubbornness. It was a complete rejection of the power dynamic he represented. Captain Jackson's negotiation over coffee beans reframed a military standoff as a logistics issue, undermining his authority without firing a shot. Then Plick returned from the human ship, not with excuses but with hard data on an existential threat. Each event was a hammer blow to his worldview, forcing him to consider that his certainties might be wrong. The quantum scrambler proposal was the breaking point. It was the antithesis of everything he knew. A weapon built from scrap, based on theoretical science requiring a complete abandonment of fleet discipline. His officers' objections were textbook correct. It was reckless. It was a gamble. Accepting it meant discarding the entire playbook his career was built on. Then Jackson delivered her diagnosis. His beautiful formations were predictable. His strength was a weakness. The choice was no longer between right and wrong. It was between dying with perfect form and surviving with a messy, desperate act. He gave the order. He chose survival. This was not an easy shift. It was a painful unraveling. He had to consciously suppress the instincts drilled into him at the academy. The urge to centralize command. The need for clean battle lines. The reliance on proven technology. He had to trust chaos. He had to place the fate of his fleet, and a significant portion of the galaxy, in the hands of a mining captain who cared more about cargo freshness than military honor. His mind, trained for a lifetime to find order, had to learn to navigate unpredictability. It was the hardest thing he had ever done. The resolution of his internal conflict was absolute. He did not just accept the new way. He became its most vocal advocate. In the strategy sessions that followed the battle, he was the one who cited the scrambler's success. He defended the chaotic fleet maneuvers. He argued for the integration of human tactical principles into standard doctrine. He used his rank and his combat record, both built on the old system, to dismantle that same system from within. Vexlor became a living example of the Confederation's evolution. His journey from rigid disciplinarian to adaptive commander mirrored the larger cultural shift happening across the fleet and the government. He was proof that even the most entrenched mindset could change when faced with an undeniable reality. His command style retained its precision, but it was no longer brittle. It could bend. It could incorporate the unexpected. He learned to see the universe not as a set of fixed rules to be enforced, but as a dynamic system to be navigated. The commander who had once viewed a single unorthodox ship as a threat now understood it could be the key to salvation. Commander Vexlor found his most influential teacher in the most unlikely of places. A mining captain he had initially dismissed as a nuisance. Her classroom was a cramped ship bridge over a static-filled communication channel. Her syllabus written in defiance and duct tape. She never lectured. She demonstrated. Each transmission, each action of the last laugh, was a lesson that systematically dismantled his understanding of power, warfare, and leadership. Her curriculum was brutal, practical, and entirely effective. Her methods upended every principle he held sacred. Where he saw a military blockade, she saw a shipping delay. Where he employed disciplined firepower, she used energy absorption. Her tactics were not found in any academy manual because they were written in the moment, based on immediate need and available resources. She taught through stark, undeniable example. The lesson was always the same. The solution is what works, not what is supposed to work. The core of her instruction was a triad of concepts his own culture had undervalued. Adaptability was the first lesson. She showed him that rigid structures break under unexpected pressure, while flexible ones bend and survive. Ingenuity was the second. She proved that a device built from mining equipment could defeat an enemy that his most advanced weapons could not touch. Courage was the final, most profound lesson. It was not the courage to stand in a perfect line. It was the courage to fly into a jump point knowing you would not return, because it was the only way to finish the job. She valued improvisation over perfect planning. Her entire approach was reactive, built on assessing a problem and using whatever was at hand to solve it. A perfect plan that took weeks to develop was useless against a threat that would arrive in hours. A good enough plan executed immediately was infinitely more valuable. She taught him that planning was not about predicting every variable. It was about building a toolkit and a mindset capable of handling the variables you could not predict. Her negotiation over the blockade was a masterclass in leveraging social contracts. She reframed a military surrender into a business negotiation about cargo inspections and return trips. She offered transparency and guest rights, seizing the moral high ground while appearing completely casual. She understood that incentives often work better than threats. She showed him that diplomacy could be a pragmatic discussion of mutual benefit, not just a process of issuing ultimatums. Her most powerful tool was a stubborn, unshakable pragmatism. She was not interested in glory, honor, or protocol. She was interested in results. Her focus on the coffee beans was not a joke. It was a statement of priority. The mission came first. The objective was everything. Sentiment and ceremony were distractions. This pragmatic focus allowed her to see the core of a problem when others were lost in the details of procedure. She cut through the noise and went straight for the solution, no matter how unconventional or personally costly. Vexlor learned from the person he had initially judged as beneath his notice. The student of perfect formations became the master of tactical chaos because a mining captain showed him it was necessary. He learned to value the plan that worked over the plan that looked good on a simulator. He learned to trust ingenuity over doctrine. The commander, trained for a lifetime in conventional warfare, had his entire philosophy reshaped by an expert in the unconventional. The teacher was gone, but the lessons remained, etched into the new protocols of a changed fleet. The Last Laugh's legacy was not measured in its size or its original purpose. It was a mining barge, an ugly collection of spare parts and patched hull plates. Its impact, however, reshaped the military doctrine of a galactic power. The ship became a case study, its every system and action analyzed by Confederation engineers and tacticians. What they had once dismissed as reckless improvisation was now recognized as a new form of engineering and tactical philosophy. Its technological innovations, born from necessity, became the new standard for research and development. The energy absorption technology, which had allowed it to treat weapon fire as a power source, was reverse engineered. New defensive systems were designed not to deflect attacks, but to channel and store incoming energy. The use of gravitational eddies for propulsion and sensor masking, which had made the ship nearly invisible, was integrated into the next generation of scout and reconnaissance vessels. The Quantum Scrambler, a device built from mining equipment, became the prototype for a new class of electronic warfare systems designed to disrupt hive-mind coordination. These were not minor upgrades. They were foundational shifts in how the Confederation thought about ship design and combat. The crew's resourcefulness became a teaching tool. Fleet academies introduced new exercises that limited cadets' resources, forcing them to solve complex problems with minimal tools. The lesson was clear. Ingenuity was a more valuable asset than unlimited firepower. The willingness to sacrifice for the greater good, demonstrated in the final jump point collapse, was formally incorporated into leadership training. It was presented not as a tragic necessity, but as the ultimate expression of tactical responsibility. The mission, the objective, the survival of others, these were the priorities. Personal survival was secondary. These concepts fundamentally reshaped Confederation defense strategies. The old doctrine of overwhelming force and perfect formations was archived. The new doctrine emphasized adaptability, asymmetric response, and strategic sacrifice. Standard protocols now included contingency plans for technologically superior or unpredictable enemies, plans that relied on the principles demonstrated by the human ship. Human approaches were no longer seen as a curiosity. They were integrated into the core tactical manuals. Fleet commanders were expected to be flexible, to think beyond the approved playbook, and to consider solutions that prioritized effectiveness over tradition. The ship's legacy lives on in the changed tactics of every Confederation vessel. The view screen on Vexlor's bridge now displays the future of the fleet. New patrol frigates slide into view. Their hulls are not the smooth, polished surfaces of the old designs. They are angular, with irregular paneling and protruding sensor arrays that echo the Last Laugh's asymmetrical profile. These are not aesthetic choices. The designs incorporate energy-absorbent composite alloys and localized gravity manipulators for signature reduction. They are faster, harder to target, and capable of operating in environments that would cripple a traditional warship. They are the product of a painful but necessary lesson. They are proof that a single defiant ship and its pragmatic crew did more than win a battle. They forced an entire civilization to evolve, to build a stronger future on the foundation of its own shattered assumptions. The memory of that ugly mining barge is now physically embodied in every new ship that leaves the docks. A permanent reminder that true strength often comes in unexpected forms. The Galactic Confederation charted a new course. Humanity's status shifted from dismissed outsiders to central strategic partners, a transformation as stark as it was necessary. The old power structures built on control and predictability gave way to a new dynamic that valued the ability to adapt under pressure. Jump point control remained a critical factor in galactic affairs, a key to logistics and movement. But it was no longer the absolute measure of power it once was. It was now understood that holding the gate meant little if you lacked the ingenuity to defend it against something that didn't use the gate. Human ingenuity was formally recognized as a strategic military asset. Their approach to problem-solving, once labeled reckless, was now a sought-after capability. Planning sessions at the highest levels of command included human liaisons, their perspectives actively solicited for contingency scenarios involving unknown threats. Their value was not in their fleet size, which remained modest, but in their cognitive flexibility. They could see angles and possibilities that conventional tactical thinking missed, turning liabilities into advantages with a pragmatism that bordered on alchemy. This shift extended beyond the military into galactic diplomacy. Negotiations began to incorporate a more human-style pragmatism. The old model of issuing ultimatums and demanding compliance was tempered by a new focus on mutual incentive and practical solutions. The goal became finding a functional arrangement, not just enforcing a predetermined outcome. Diplomats started talking about resource allocation, shared benefits, and timelines, mirroring Jackson's initial attempt to negotiate her delivery route. It was less about who held the high ground and more about what worked for all parties involved. The three universal truths taught to every species upon joining the Confederation were officially rewritten. The new version acknowledged the vast emptiness of space and the importance of jump points, but the third truth was completely revised. It no longer spoke of human insanity. The new text stated that while space is vast and often empty, the human capacity for resilience and adaptive problem-solving serves as a critical resource for galactic stability. Their spirit, their stubborn refusal to accept inevitable outcomes, now filled a void that technology and discipline could not. The galaxy learned, through brutal experience, that true strength is not derived from uniformity of thought. It comes from diversity of perspective. A civilization that only produces officers who think the same way will eventually meet a threat it cannot comprehend. The incorporation of human thinking did not make the Confederation weaker or less disciplined. It made it more robust, more resilient, and infinitely more prepared for the unexpected horrors the void might still hold. The transmission ends. On the bridge of Vexlor's flagship, new protocol alerts flash on the main console. They are not warnings. They are updates. Notifications for revised first contact procedures, updated tactical assessments for asymmetric threats, and new resource allocation models that prioritize adaptability over raw firepower. The systems are active, integrated, and running. The old way is archived. The new order is operational. The channel closes, but the link remains, a permanent open line to a new way of thinking. She was supposed to surrender. She didn't even flinch. Instead, Captain Jackson saved entire star systems with a stubbornness that rewrote galactic law. Her courage wasn't about defiance. It was about seeing a path no one else could see and taking it without hesitation. She proved that rules are just suggestions when survival is on the line. Compliance maintains order. Courage forges a new one. The view screen goes dark now, the static fading. But the lesson remains, a permanent fixture in the fleet's memory and every new protocol. We will remember.